The power of the signal, Altman realized, had increased some time during the night. The indicator he'd installed was reading higher than he'd ever seen it. The pulse ended and it fell back still higher than it had been in its previous resetting state. He glanced over at Field, who seemed immersed in his own collocations. Just to be safe, he angled his holoscreen so that there'd be no chance of Field seeing what was on it. He scrolled back through the data log until he found the shift. There's sometime around 6 or 7 in the morning, though he'd have to do a full correlation to make sure. The signal increase wasn't gradual, but immediate, as if something had suddenly and deliberately amplified it. He hadn't heard from Hammond since the night in the bar, which concerned him a little but not too much. The security technician was probably lying low, being careful. When he wanted to get in touch, he would. In the meantime, it was up to Altman to find out what was going on. He logged his results into the encrypted database and then looked to see if they correlated with work done by the others. The others in the case being the 3 other scientists who had, like Altman, been intrigued by the gravity anomaly and the pulse and wanted to pursue it. Showalter, Ramirez, and Scud. Showalter, who had more powerful equipment than Altman, simply sensor, had gotten the same readings. At 6:38 a.m. there had been an extraordinarily strong pulse followed by a shift in the signal pattern. The signal was now perpetually amplified. There was still high and low points, but the basic profile of the signal was stronger and had remained so ever since. Ramirez had noted something else, something that he had picked up off the satellite image while trying to get a sense of whether there and been a change in the condition of the crater itself. A freighter anchored about 15 miles southeast of the crater's center. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it, said Ramirez in the vid file he'd attached, but then I go back a day and it's still there. I go forward a day and it's there too. If it's really a freighter, what would it be doing sitting in the same place? So yesterday morning, I hired a local man who called himself Captain Jesus to use his old motorboat to run me out for a closer look. I took a fishing pole with me. Once we were about 200 meters from the freighter, I had Captain Jesus stop and cast my line into the water. The captain told me I wasn't going to catch anything. When I asked why not, he gave me a long, hard look and pointed out to me that I hadn't bothered to put any bait on the end of my line. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Captain Jesus made a point of looking at the freighter and then looking back at me, then told me that it didn't seem like it was fish I wanted to catch, and that the kind of fishing I wanted would cost me extra. In the end, I had to promise to pay the good captain double his normal rate to stay there so that we could get a good look at the freighter. It didn't have any markings other than that it seemed an ordinary enough freighter except for the fact that it had a brand new heavy-duty submarine lift attached to its deck. That was all I had time to ascertain, Ramirez said. We'd been there all of 5 minutes, 2 of which I spent bantering with Captain Jesus, when a launch appeared from the other side of the ship and pulled up alongside us, manned by 4 muscle-bound boys with military haircuts, but without a requisite military garb. "Move along," one of them said. "I'm fishing," I claimed. "Fishing somewhere else," he said. I was going to argue, but Captain Jesus threw the boat in gear and took us out. When I asked him why later, all he would say was, "These are not good men," which left me with 3 questions, said Ramirez, concluding his vidlog. First, what use would a freighter, if it really is a freighter, have for a submarine? Second, what makes them want to keep other boats at a distance? Third, what the hell is really going on? What indeed, wondered Altman. The last report from Scud, a localized Swede, didn't arrive for another hour. It was a document instead of a vidlink. So sorry, his report read. Had it to double check. What followed was a series of charts with captions in Swedish, none of which Altman knew how to read. After them, Scud had written in sufficient data for certainty. For certainty of what? Wondered Altman. He tried to scroll down, but the report ended there. He checked the network and found that Scud was still logged into the system. "Scud," he typed, "please confirm the conclusion of your report." "By sufficient data, I mean there is not enough data," he wrote. "Without enough data, we cannot be certain." Altman sighed. Scud was a good scientist, but a little lacking in communication skills. "What is your data concerning?" he asked. "Seismographic data," wrote Scud. "And what were you trying to prove?" Altman wrote. "That the seismic disturbance was something generated by a machine rather by ordinary seismological activity." "What kind of machine?" "As I said in my note," wrote Scud, and then there was a long moment where the screen remained blank. "Very sorry," he finally wrote. "I see now I left it off my note. A drill. I do not have enough data to prove it, and maybe it is only ordinary seismic activity. But I think maybe somebody has been drilling, and maybe in the center of the crater." Altman immediately disconnected from the system and went outside to call Scud. The man seemed startled, a little confused, but after a while he started to fill in the details in a way what Altman understood. Scud was drawing his readings from multiple seismorphics, some on land, some underwater, several very close to the center of the crater itself. Only those near the center had noticed anything. The reading, Scud said, was something that would normally be dismissed as insignificant, very minor seismic activity. But it was also possible, he claimed, that it could be from a heavy industrial scale drill. It was a very regular, he said, which would not be atypical of a seismic event. But you're not sure if it's in the center of the crater? No, said Scud. Exactly, that is the problem. Where else would it be if not the center? It might be as far as 50 meters from the center, said Scud. I have done calculations, but I am afraid they are inconclusive. But that might as well be the center, said Altman, frustrated. No, you see, said Scud patiently, as I said, it might be as far as 50 meters from the center. That is not the center. Altman started to argue, then stopped, thanking him, and disconnected. He stayed there looking out at the ocean a while, and then glanced inside to the window. Field was still keeping to his side of the room, talking on the telephone now, seeming no more and no less animated than earlier. Altman turned back to the ocean again. Slowly, things were beginning to take shape in his mind. He wished that Hammond would get back in touch, since he'd been aware of it before anyone else. He might have a perspective that Altman and the others didn't have yet. In the meantime, it was up to them. There was nothing to say for a certain that the pulse, the freighter, and the seismic readings were all connected. But then again, there was nothing to suggest that they weren't, and all three had something in common. The center of the crater, something was going on down there. Maybe something had been discovered. Maybe it was some sort of weapons test. Maybe it was some incredible, uncommon, but natural phenomenon. But something was happening, something weird, something that someone didn't want the public to know about. He swore he would find out what it was, even if it killed him.